course, there, I'm going to the 82nd Airborne, so you go to jump school. Jump school was where I started getting a little bit more motivation, going to be a paratrooper, going to be a paratrooper, going to be a paratrooper. And I couldn't. To me, jump school was a blur. It went real fast. We still had a 0 week, and then we did 3 weeks of training and everything. But it was that's the first time I saw these idiots would drop out of formation and go hit the mud puddles and everything while we're running around the 2-mile track. And I understand that these guys were SEALs. Never heard of SEALs before in my life. Didn't know what even though I'd done junior ROTC, I didn't know that Navy SEALs even existed.
Right.
Until I saw them, diving into these mud puddles and everything, just doing idiotic stuff. But they were tough, They were real tough, and I was like, that's the special ops. I need to get into that special ops somehow, So.
Well, you kind of did. You went to Fort Bragg as a RTO.
I went to Fort Bragg as an RTO, yeah. And so I'm still maintaining hope that I won't end up in I wanted to be in a high-speed unit. The 82nd Airborne was known to be one of the premier parachute divisions.
So you went from Gordon to being billeted on Ardennes, right? Is that where you were at? 82nd Ardennes, right?
Ardennes, yeah. Well, again, we took the bus.
Yes, of course.
Gordon.
Yes. But your next stop was Ardennes. Ardennes is what I always pronounce it.
Got to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and we had this briefing from, we were all buzzed head and everything. We got this briefing from this first sergeant. And the first thing he said was, you guys need to grow some hair, and mature a little bit and everything. And these are all still World War II barracks, where we in processing for the 82nd Airborne. But the 82nd Airborne was in 3-story brick buildings all the way down Ardennes and Gruber Road. And we got there on a Friday. Well, actually a Saturday. We left jump school on Friday. And so Monday morning, I got out of the detail. Everybody was supposed to be doing details and stuff like that, and we were supposed to get, our initial issue and then get in processed for Fort Bragg and do all kinds of things. Back then everything wasn't so automatic. You had a lot of paperwork to do. But I'd gotten out of my detail, and I went right down the street, and I stopped in every infantry unit, every infantry battalion I could get into, and asked for a letter of acceptance, just to be sure that I'd got it. I would go to the infantry. And I came back with two letters of acceptance and stuff like that.
The other ones told you to fuck off.
And I put them on top of my packet, when it got to where you're going to get assigned and everything. And they said, yeah, whatever. Here's your orders, 82nd Signal Battalion. And I was ready to go AWOL right then. And I reported into the 82nd Signal Battalion. So, and I'd met my platoon sergeant, Sergeant Black, and some of the craziest guys I ever met were part of my platoon and everything, but they were all packed up. They were going to Fort Irwin, California. And this is the spring of 1982. And they said, well, you're going to sit behind and you're going to do this. And I told my platoon sergeant, I said, I don't want to be here. I want to go to the infantry. And he's like, well, why don't you just give it a chance, blah, blah, blah. And they all took off. They got on planes and they went to Fort Irwin, California. And the next week they jumped in 35-mile-an-hour winds. I was not there, but I think it was like I can't remember what the death toll was, but it was well over a dozen people got killed, and 110 people just got drugged across the drop zone. And just the 82nd got tore up out there.
Right.
I thought, well, maybe they'll let me go to the 101st or something. Back then, the 101st still was a parachute division. But they came back, and I felt absolutely horrible. Nobody in my platoon got hurt, but they saw some for a training accident, they saw some pretty horrible things, watching their buddies get drugged to death and everything, and they were supposed to simulate going to combat, and they didn't even get that accomplished before a bunch of people got hurt.
Wow. So
that was my introduction to the 82nd Airborne.
So you dodged that bullet, is what you're saying? That jump.
I did.
Yeah, you dodged that bullet, so to speak. And so you were in the 82nd for how long?
I was in the 82nd until 1984. Yeah, there was some interesting times. And back then, it was called the Jumpin' Junkies, and I dodged that bullet on that jump, but the Jumpin' Junkies were my platoon was mostly white guys, right? When all of our supervisors were black, and Sergeant Black had moved up, and Sergeant Green took over the platoon. And he was a black guy, and we got along. We all got along. But the thing is all the white guys in my platoon were all druggies, or at least dope smokers, I shouldn't say. I should say there was a few guys, and we had a guy named Frank Ellis. He was an alcoholic, and Frank and I spent the Friday night in his room drinking whiskey and watching True Grit on television. He had a TV in his room, and I remember, I kind of remember pulling the fire alarm, and I remember fighting with the CQ, and the ACQ was a big Samoan guy, huge guy, and I saw him coming up the stairs, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to take this guy out,
right?
With my fist. So I grabbed a folding chair and hit him right across the face as soon as he got to the top of the stairs.
That made everything so much better.
Yeah, and I do remember a little bit of the dog coming with the MPs, and but I kind of sobered up at the hospital, and
Sweet, please.
They called it Ward 4A for the psychos, And this
for Womack.
Yeah, Womack. Yeah. So this was May of '82, and I didn't really pass out or anything. I just kind of sobered up, and I was like, "Well, where the hell am I?" And they said, "You're Ward 4A," and I was like, "Well, we all knew that was the loony bin." And I was like, "Well, what did I do to get here?" And they told me that I'd been, got drunk and beat up the CQ and the ACQ, and the MP showed up and got in a fight with them, and they sicked a dog on me, and I bit the dog, so they figured I was crazy, and they put me in Ward 4A. And all I knew was when I got back to the unit that I was on summary court-martial orders. I was going to be court-martialed, and I realized then that my aversion towards, kind of working my way to a special ops unit or anything in my old military career was over. And I called my dad and told him what was going on and everything. And he said, "Well, your little brother, he was raised by his mom. He says, you're like my only son. I can make a phone call and we can get you out of the Army. And just say that you're my only son, and I don't want you to be in the Army no more, and we'll get you chaptered out of the Army." And and this is all on payphone back then, 1982. And I got to thinking about it for a second, and I was like, "No, absolutely not." I just turned 18 years old, and I'm just like, that's not going to happen. No, I can't do that. I put myself here. I got to work myself out of this. So I was the only private EOU one in the 82nd Airborne for the rest of the summer. I lost all my rank. The 82nd was getting cleaned up. They were called the Jumpin' Junkies. So everybody was either going to the retraining brigade in Fort Riley, Kansas, or they were getting chaptered out of the Army. And they decided that there was too many. All the slots for the retraining brigade were full from the 82nd Airborne. So I didn't. When I went to do my 30 days hard labor, I didn't even go to the retraining brigade. And the CCF, the Charlie's Chicken Farm, they called them back then. That had been taken over by this unit called the Delta Force, and we knew a little bit about who they were, and they had just been formed a couple of years before that, and they had tried to rescue the hostages in Iran, and of course, Desert One. We all heard about Desert One, and matter of fact, Sergeant Black, he was doing all kinds of PT so he could go to the Delta Force. That was the thing on Fort Bragg, that you wanted to go to the Delta Force, or you wanted to go down to the Green Berets, where they held the Gabriel demonstrations.
Right.
And you had 5th Group there. You had 7th Group was at Fort Bragg. Of course, SWIC, the training brigade was there, and I think they had just activated 1st Group too. So you had 3 groups right there on Fort Bragg, and of course, here I am with a private EOU-1, no stripes at all, and I'm going down and trying to get letter of acceptance to the Green Berets, and they're like, maybe not, no, do a couple years, that kind of thing, and so I just kind of resigned myself to, I'm gonna get stuck here, and I had a bad attitude, and the guys I hung out with in the platoon, they were all kind of bad attitude. They couldn't wait to get out of the military either. And my best friend was 17, and I just turned 18, so we kind of grew up together, Jeff Matt. And we're in formation one morning, and we went running down our dens, in our little airborne shuffle and everything. And we were, of course, all of us were hungover or bad breath and everything like that. And we were
zoo breath.
And and they were trying to get us to sing cadence, and of course we're just doing smart aleck remarks back, and we hate this and hate that, and we got 2 miles down the road, and the first sergeant stopped us and made us do push-ups, and I stood up, and there's this old guy standing next to me, and I figured this was a new guy to the unit, and I was like, Cherry, you came to a fucked up unit. This is a horrible unit. You're gonna hate it here. And that first sergeant goes, in case you guys didn't know it, your new first sergeant's out there with you, and you're making asses of yourself. And I looked over, and I was like, oh, my God. I just stuck my foot in my mouth. There's my new first sergeant. And his name was Kermit Short. And he held room inspection that day, and he came up to my room, and I'd just been out of...
Of course he did.
Well, he came up to my room, and I was in the room with Jeff Matt, and we had all of our stuff laid out, and we were doing room inspection and everything. And he's like, who's your first line supervisor, LaRue? And I was like, I don't know. I just got out of jail. So that was my introduction to my new first sergeant, who turned out to be one of the biggest mentors of my life. I mean, he pretty much pulled me and a couple other guys down out of formation at the end of the day, and he told them, he said, it's my life's mission to kick all 4 of you guys out of the Army. I'm going to get rid of you.
Hey, Dylan, what is our Seaux Larreau was in jail count right now?
I think
2 or 3 count. Yes.
Yeah, there was one time in Gallup, twice in Roosevelt, and now I did 22 days hard time. They pulled me out because they pulled me out of cell block H in Fayetteville because I was making too much money playing jailhouse poker, so they pulled me out early. I got out early, so and yeah. I decided then that you know what, this isn't too bad, the 82nd Airborne, and I started volunteering for every detail. I was on every detail anyway, but
right.
I'd volunteer for them anyway. And this First Sergeant Short, you know, again, we're all disappointed. This is a volunteer force, so we're all disappointed that we're either just going to the motor pool or we're doing you know, these signal MOSs that really didn't have anything to do what we thought with fighting the Soviet Union. So we'd go out to the woods, and I would dig the foxholes. I would volunteer to dig the foxholes. I would try to do everything infantry that I could. Well, First Sergeant Short, he was a Vietnam vet, and lots of Vietnam vets back in the 82nd then. But if you were late for formation, or if you'd screwed up and talked back to your supervisor or something during the week, you'd got School of the Soldier, which was held on Saturday morning.
Yep.
And you usually ended up doing a ruck march. First thing you did was PT test, and then you put on rucksacks and you did a ruck march, and then you got classes on how to be infantry. Well, I was there every Saturday, and the first sergeant would show up, and
Did you volunteer to go, or did you just show up?
I would actually I would just show up and just be there, because this is the only Army training I was getting.
Right.
I loved School of the Soldier. I could not wait for Saturday morning, and I would be there. And a lot of the guys hated jumping, absolutely hated jumping. So anytime there was a jump going on, I would volunteer. I would rig up my rucksack, and I would show up and stand there on standby, because a lot of guys would get out of it. They'd go to sick call or whatever, and there'd be slots open for parachutes, and I would get on the jump, and I would go jump, And we didn't have any money. The 82nd didn't have any money. The Army didn't have any money, and we usually end up having a road march back from Sicily or Salerno or whatever. It turned out to be long road marches, but I enjoyed the hell out of it. And once I got into, okay, here's what the Army does, I really enjoyed it.
Right.
So
how long were you in the? Now, the 82nd was your only unit prior to you getting out the first time.
No. So I did this for about a year, School of the Soldier and everything, and my rank came back. So I was PFC. Then I just made Spec 4, and in October of 1983, I was called. I was living off post with a girlfriend, and I got called in the middle of the night and said, "Come back in. You're going to war." And I had no idea what was going on, but she delivered papers and everything on Sunday mornings, and we had just found out that the Marines had been bombed in Beirut. And I figured, well, we must be going to Syria, or we must be jumping into Lebanon, because I think they've first they accused the Syrians of doing it instead of Hezbollah. And so I packed up my rucksack like I'm going to go be in the hills of the wintertime in the Middle East. And then it kind of got finagled around and everything, and then we were told to be quiet. And I missed. I got on in this little Jeep. Me and another guy named Sergeant Lowe. We got in a Jeep and we went to the green ramp, and the plane that we were supposed to be on had just taken off. And they said, well, there's 2 engineers that are going, and they're going to meet up with the Rangers. And we're like, well, what's going on? Well, they wouldn't even tell us. We had no idea. So the next day, the entire 82nd got called out. And that's when we found out we were going to Grenada.
Right.
Nobody ever heard of Grenada. Right? Matter of fact, they gave us little brochures. They went downtown to a travel agency or something, and we had this brochure of, okay, here's the outline of the island of Spice. We're like, well, what the heck's going on in Grenada? We had no idea. So I ended up. That's when I realized that all this training and all this bravado and this talk about if the balloon goes up, your 82nd Airborne is going to be the first one in the fight, the Fulda Gap type thing. Well, here we were going to war, all right? And there was a couple guys that were crying about it and everything, but I couldn't wait. I was like, oh, I'm ready for this. And the reason I was called out is because they had just come up with this satellite radio, Manpack satellite radio. And because I was big and I did all kinds of road marches and I was always volunteering to go to the woods or whatever, the first sergeant Short actually picked me. He's like, this guy will do good in combat. So we want you to carry this 30-pound radio into your first combat. And we went to the ASP. They brought the ASP over to Green Ramp, so this ammunition supply point. And you knew that was for real then, after all the training and everything, when they start issuing live ammo, that you're really going somewhere.
That's not on a range.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I grabbed 2 basic loads, loaded up all my magazines, and I grabbed a Law, I grabbed a Claymore, I grabbed way too many hand grenades. They just handing that stuff out like candy. And then I went over and tried to stuff it all into my rucksack, which already had a 30-pound radio in it and a sleeping bag, that I still hadn't taken out for Syria or Lebanon. And put the H harness around that sleep, and I mean, it just it looked like it was going to explode. And then I put on my main parachute and my reserve parachute, and I hooked it all up, and I'm sitting there. We're all sitting there on Green Ramp, and the 141s started coming in from Little Rock Air Force Base, C-141s before the C-17. And they all turned around, and the clamshells opened in the back, and they said, "Safety to the plane, check the planes," And the sun was just barely coming up, and all the safeties came out to the end of the ramp and were like shaking their heads and everything. And I'm sitting there, with all this stuff on, wondering how am I ever going to make it out the door, and we're going to jump on the Grenada. And the safeties are all doing this, and came back, and I overheard them talking about how there's no anchor line cables on any of these planes. So that's the reason that the 82nd Airborne did not jump into Grenada. The Air Force showed up with no anchor line cables,
Wow.
For a parachute division. And a couple generals got arguing, yelling back and forth and everything, and they're like, no. Everybody take your chutes off, pack it on the plane, we're air landing. And we knew that the Rangers had already taken the airfield, and they had jumped onto the airfield at Grenada.
They had anchor line cables.
They had C-130s, too. And those 2 engineers that we were supposed to meet up with, I'd have been jumping with them because the Rangers didn't have a satellite manpack radio.
Right.
That would have been with them. We were supposed to be the liaison radio. And we got on there and we air landed. I don't think we made it down there to Grenada until just before dark, the first day. And that's when I knew that all training was off, because the jump master or the load master, as we all stood up, the plane had just landed, and we all just kind of unbuckled and stood up and everything. And he got on the loudspeaker and said, "Everybody sit back down. We're going to do this nice and organized and everything." And the C-130 went out to the air there in his airstrip and turned around, and clamshells came open. And he saw a red and green tracer going back and forth. That loadmaster got on that loudspeaker, and he's like, "Get off, everybody, get off!" And we just ran off of that plane, because we knew it. We could, one RPG, we could end
Right.
that whole thing. So we ended. That was my baptism fire, if you will, jumping off that C-141 in onto the airstrip, and of course my rucksack was way too heavy. And skinned up both my knees, and then I switched partners from Sergeant Lowe, who was a real good guy, a black guy, to a guy named McCormick, and McCormick had been kicked out of the Q course as an 18 Echo. Well, they didn't have 18 series back then, but he got kicked out of the Q course. So him and I were partnered up to carry this satellite radio in there into Grenada, and we were supposed to meet up with Colonel Silvasi of the 2nd Brigade headquarters. And we got off the airfield and everything, and we found out where they had their little brigade talk over there, and we reported in. And the HF team that had come from Alpha Company, I was in Bravo Company, and we had an HF team from Alpha Company of the 82nd Airborne Division, or 82nd Signal Battalion. And the HF team couldn't get their radio to work. They hadn't brought in their base for their antenna, right? And So Savasi had no comms with Fort Bragg. And he's like, can you guys get that radio up and working? And McCormick's like, we tried to set it up and everything right there on the airfield. And, no, we're not getting a bounce back. We can't hit the satellite from here and everything. And he's like, well, what does it take to get you guys to get this thing working? And I said, let's just go to the top of that hill. And McCormick was mad as hell at me. So he said, get your ass up there. And there's just the two of us up on this hill. No infantry support,
Right, no
nothing.
support, right.
And, we had this little pad called the 404, 4004. It's just basically a message pad, And we went up there and got a hold of Fort Bragg, and they started sending us messages, and usually a lieutenant or a captain, and they're just nothing tactical, nothing important, but we'd have to run messages. We'd go up there and write these messages down from so and so and so and so, and I'd get back, and McCormick have a stack of them, and I'd say, okay, your turn, you run them down there, and we did that all night, just back and forth, just delivering messages to Colonel Savasi, and then the next morning, we're sitting up on top of that hill, the sun's just coming up and everything, and it just all kinds of some airstrikes came in. They called in some air, and they being the 82nd, and we were hearing some voices coming up the other side of the hill. Right? And I thought, oh gosh, the Cubans are going to try to push us off of here. Here come the Cubans. So I grabbed a couple of those grenades, and McCormick had locked and loaded his M16, and I said, no, I've been doing all the school of soldier and everything and talking to these Vietnam vets. No,
Right.
we got to throw grenades, So I pulled the pin on a grenade and I handed him a couple of grenades, and I'm sitting there and I hear you can see the silhouette of these guys coming up the hill, right? And the 82nd had the Kevlar helmet, which kind of looked like the German helmet in World War II, but it was made out of fiberglass. And these guys were wearing steel pots, so for sure they were Cubans, So I pulled the pin on that grenade and everything, and I saw this one shadow go down and go, oh, fuck, that hurt, And I'm like,
English. Very good English.
these guys are Rangers, And so McCormick stood up and gave them the challenge, and they came back with the password and everything, and they came up there and they, can we set up around you guys and everything? Yeah, of course. And, and the sun still wasn't up and everything, and McCormick's like, yeah, well, man, we got lucked out on that one. And I was like, where's your flashlight? What do you need a flashlight? I can't find the pin to this grenade. Holding the grenade.
I don't think I can hold this all night.
Yeah, so that was our introduction to combat, was almost throwing grenades on the Rangers,
So how long were you in the Army after that? Because I know you got out.
Well, that was the day before McCormick and I were in a friendly airstrike. That same TOC headquarters, we got attached to that that brigade headquarters, and we'd moved up a couple terrain features away from the airfield, and we were sitting up over there, right into a Cuba barracks, right, and some shooting was going on, and I mean these guys were way far away from us, but they were down in the valley, and there was some shooting, and there was some infantry down in front of us and everything. But I saw these PRA members, jump into this building and then started shooting on the infantry. I knew exactly where they were at, so I was shooting towards that building and laying in front of the Cuban barracks, and this master sergeant came out and told me to stop shooting. You're shooting over the infantry and stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I stopped shooting, and I just laying there in the grass and watch what was going on below me. And McCormick was hungry, so he grabbed some sea rations, and he was going to go ask if he could make a fire. Well, we got hit by A6s, right? So there was 19 guys on that hill, and I was the only one that didn't get wounded.
Ooh, dodged it again.
Yeah. So I was laying right there in the grass. The grass just jumped up in front of me. The whole ground shook, and then I heard the fire. And it's kind of like a minigun, but it was a what Gao 19B. It just, that kind of, that growl. And, I mean, pieces and parts and wood was flying everywhere. And I was like, oh my God. It took me a second to realize we'd been hit, And I stood up just in time to see the second one coming down. But a captain had got to the radio, and he called for an abort. And that plane did not hit us. So they were A6 intruders. I think they were. But I looked inside that building and just pieces and parts of everybody. And we were all detached. We weren't a unit per se. We were just kind of a quasi TOC or Tactical Operations Center of all kinds of support guys put together. And I was just ripping. We ended up. That master sergeant did a good job. He was wounded. Everybody was wounded slightly, but there were some that were wounded extremely bad. And we called for the medevacs, and we ripped off doors of the building and everything like that. And we got everybody medevaced and everything, including McCormick. McCormick had taken shrapnel through the hand, and then we're like, well, why'd they hit us? Why'd they hit us? And we're looking at the side of the building. There's on both sides of the building are ZPU-2s, the old Soviet anti-aircraft guns. We're like, well, let's push these things off the hill, so that we won't get hit again.
Right.
So we went over there, and we were trying to figure out how to unlimber these things and push them off the hill. One guy ended up pulling the crossbar in between the barrels right when the planes were flying over again, and they're shooting again. And we're like, let's get the hell off this hill. They're coming back again. And they didn't. They didn't come back and get us. But it was I think that was the probably the epitome or the light bulb went off on my head that day, especially that night when we're laying under the poncho and it's raining and everything, and we lost 2/3 of the talk, and that's when I took it upon myself that I'd never blow off training, no matter what kind of training it was, that I needed realistic training, and that I would spend the rest of my time in the military doing realistic training. So that was my aha moment.
Aha. So, as I mentioned earlier, after Grenada,
after Grenada we went back. Really funny. McCormick got medevac the next day because his hands swelled up and everything. I got another guy. And my radio had actually taken some nicks off the shrapnel and everything. Funny how you got this piece of shrapnel here. That's exactly, this metal just flies everywhere. So the RF cable on my radio had got damaged. Got it fixed. And when I finally got back to, it was time for me to leave Grenada, which was about 10 days later, all I got was a radio and, a message. And we got replacements, but they were going to fall in on the radio. The radio was staying there, and so it moved up from a battalion to a brigade headquarters. And I was told by this lieutenant back at Fort Bragg, get on the next thing smoking and get home. Well, we're further down the island and away from the airfield. So I told the guy that was with me, I was like, okay, pack up your ruck. We're walking. And I started walking, and it got dark on us and everything. So I got arrested again for walking after dark.
Tally that.
Yeah. So I got arrested again by Colonel Crocker of the infamous 82nd Infantry that I wanted to go to, So we got arrested again, and we did make a plane the next day, but it wasn't the one in the morning. We didn't go till the afternoon. And I got back, and I was told that Colonel Crocker wanted me to court-martial me for walking after dark. And nobody told us we weren't supposed to be out after dark or after curfew or whatever. And my colonel kind of laughed it off and everything. And he did send me to the training. I said, I want to go so I went to Recondo School, 18th Airborne Corps Recondo School. I hang out with all the recon teams. And I was the radio operator that was always in the woods. And if I wasn't in the woods with those recon teams, I was volunteering to go to Camp McCall and drive our Jeep around for this guy named Colonel Howard, down at the Special Forces camp at Camp McCall, and that's when I really got enamored with all these Special Forces guys. I was like, I want to be Special Forces someday. I want to be Special Forces. Well, then I come down on orders and I'm getting levied. In the 82nd, we'd get hit every year for levies. Mm-hmm. You're going to Korea or you're going to Germany. And there's no way I was going to leg unit. So I showed up to the table where, my name, my orders were at, and I was like, I'm not going to Germany. I'm not going to be a leg. And they're like, no, you're right. You're going to the Rangers. They're forming another battalion down in Fort Benning.
Right. And
so I showed up, shaved my head, had a big going away party, and everybody's like, oh, you're finally getting what you wanted. You finally getting what you wanted, So I went down to the Rangers. And we went through what's called a Ranger Indoctrination Program, RIP, was usually held at Hunter Army Airfield. Well, we were at Fort Benning, so we went to a kind of an impromptu one. And it's just a gut check, a lot of push-ups, a lot of verbal abuse and things like that. And then this guy that was working S1 or R1 down there, he's like, no, LaRue, you're good in the woods, and you know that radio, and they're starting the recon teams. You need to go try out for the recon teams. And I did what I was told, showed up as an E4, and I met this guy named Jeff Mellinger. And, of course, I'm wearing my Recondo tab, and the OG 107s and everything. And he's like, he ripped it off, and, that's an unauthorized patch. And, you're not a Ranger. You're not going to be on my recon teams. You don't have a tab and everything. And I was like, okay, whatever. But going out and doing the tryouts for the Ranger Recon was pretty easy. You just had to keep your mouth shut, and not get caught out in the woods. And I was pretty good in the woods. And the other 05 Bravo was from 1st Battalion, and he got stung by a bee, went into anaphylactic shock. Wow. So I got on my radio and called the medevac, and Mellinger's like, well, I guess you're going to be my radio operator. So welcome.
You're not keeping me out.
Yeah, welcome to Ranger Recon. You're going to be my radio operator, but you're not Halo qualified. Get your ass back to Fort Bragg and go to Halo school. So I went to Halo school as an E4 on Fort Bragg, and showed up wearing Rangers and Ranger this, Ranger that, and it was like, what a difference! What a difference! Go back to Fort Bragg, and everybody knows who the 82nd is. Everybody knows who the Green Berets are, but you show up and wearing, the black beret back then, and with that stupid haircut we had to, we had one strip of hair down the middle of our head, and it just like almost beating the women off with a stick. All the girls wanted to go out with the Ranger. So different time, different world. So I went to Halo school, and met some pretty interesting characters at Halo school, and came back and went to. I did. Let's see. Halo school was clear up until November, December time frame of 85 or 84, and then I went back and we had to do a funeral detail for a guy who had 2nd Battalion Rangers had gone down to Panama, and the first black company commander in the Rangers had accidentally called mortars in on himself and his radio operator and killed them both. So we went to a funeral detail in 1984 for him, and that was pretty much the highlight of my first Army tour. Was just either friendly fire incidents or training accidents where people were getting killed. There was a lot of that going on.
There's more of that than folks think there are.
Yes.
There is a lot of it.
Yeah.
Too much.
Way too much. So yeah, if I was to ever write a book, I would highlight those mostly.
Which I think you're wanting to work on a little bit while you're here, aren't you? A book?
There's talk of it. Yeah, there's talk of it. I'm kind of scared to do it. So yeah, so I did another 6 month. We ended up going to Winter Reforger in Germany, And then we came back from that, and I made E5. And towards March, I think it was decided that I needed to go get my Ranger tab. So I headed out to Ranger School in March of 1985.
Mm-hmm.
And I was told to be the honor graduate, not come back to the regiment unless I was the honor graduate. And I did. I worked real hard in Ranger School to be the honor graduate of that class. And I had made it, which is kind of funny, because they decided I was going to be the first sergeant out of desert phase.
Right.
Right. This is back when Ranger School still had a desert phase, you know. And I can remember
that was out at
McGregor Range.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because I can remember leaving Fort Benning and getting on a plane, C-130, that had a bunch of parachutes stacked on a pallet and reserves next to it and everything like that. And we flew and flew and flew, and then we decided we were inboard rigging. So we all started getting our parachutes on inside the plane, get your reserve on, get your ruck on, do your jump JMPI on the plane, and then sit back down. Well, I was a bigger guy, so they wanted me to jump the machine gun, which I'd already had in the mountains, you know, and so it didn't bother me because back then was the M60, and you just took the barrel off of the M60 and put it into a Weesey or a bag, and then attached that next to you. But I was going to be one of the first guys out because I had all this equipment on me, right? And I'm standing there at the open door, and I can remember seeing the Oregon Mountains, which is close to El Paso. And I was like, wait a minute, I kind of recognize those mountains. And then we came in on final, and I was like looking out the door, and I was like, there's my Uncle Brian's ranch. I could stand in the door, go, you know. And I was like, oh my God, I'm home. You know, Del City, Texas is just over a couple ridges over. And I was like, I could bury this machine gun and go get something. I knew all the ranchers' lights out there. That was the hardest 6 days for me. Was Ranger School, was desert phase, because I knew where everybody was and who lived there, and of course they're still miles and miles away, but you don't think that when you're starving to death.
That's right.
You know? And so I ended up going to Florida phase from there, and it was a desert phase. They decided, well, you're going to be the first sergeant down at Florida phase. When you're the first sergeant at Florida phase, then you know you're going to be the honor graduate. And they told me that Colonel Downing was going to change his itinerary. He was going to come when we got back to Fort Benning. He was going to pin on my tab. Mm-hmm. Don't cause any trouble, and don't get in any trouble, and don't fall in a hole. You know, you're going to be the honor graduate. Well, I found that hole. We'd snuck the 82nd had an aviation unit down there, and they were giving us a hard time. We were doing details and everything, so I got 3 or 4 volunteers together, and we posted security and everything, and I snuck into their barracks and stole all of their MREs and we put them in wet weather bags, right? And I put all the boxes back on their pallet where the MREs came in, you know, and we'd taken them back to all the students. There's only like 60 or 70 guys left in the class. Well, we made sure everybody had an extra meal, you know.
Right.
We stole this, and we almost made it because we're all getting ready to go back out, you know, to do our patrols, and our final patrols of the last week. And the aviation unit's taking that pallet and putting it on their helicopter. Well, they started up the blades of the C-47, right, or CH-47, and I just like, oh no, here. And sure enough, the wind caught those boxes and started blowing them across the airfield. So they did this big, huge investigation, and they threatened to arrest us all and everything. And they put baby powder on the window and everything. Said, we got fingerprints and everything. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But so we were already in trouble for that. And I was getting ready to go out there, and they said, hey, you don't have any patrols. You're tabbed out. You know? And they said, you're in trouble for that, but we'll, you know, I think we're going to get a major minus or something like that. But they couldn't really dig on all of us because, you know, we'd shared it. You know, we hadn't done anything to hurt ourselves. And we'd done everything, you know, according to the principles of patrolling,
Right.
you know, posted security and everything. So, so I was already on a fine line for that. But then when I was told to help these guys get their tabs and everything. And I was this guy's RTO, you know, and he said, hey, would you go out and get the resupply? And I was like, yeah, okay, and everything. They took all of our MREs away, and they were going to resupply us later. So I picked these 5 guys to go with me. This one guy's got peered out of another group. He's like, don't pick me. In 3 days, we'll be done with this crap, and I'll never have to do this again. And, you know, and I knew he was a captain and everything, but I was like, okay, sir, you don't have to. I said, why don't you empty your ruck and anybody that's got 7.62 linked, give it to him. You know, I said, you're now the ammo bearer.
Right.
And I made him carry about 600 or 700 rounds of 7.62 linked, and he was wore out the next day, wore out. And I had just got off the FLA because I'd fallen the night before and got a cut on my side of my head. And so I was just getting back, and they were in an admin halt. And the ranger and captain, the RI captain, was chewing everybody out. And I had no idea what everybody just got chewed out for. And it was basically for fist fighting and cussing and pushing each other around. And, you know, you guys aren't doing leadership. You're just beating each other up type thing. And so I got back, and he said, okay, admin halt over. Everybody go back to your security positions. And I was walking back, and that guy that had carried all that ammunition that night, he was mad as hell. And he started a fight with me, started swinging on me and everything. So I just grabbed the back of his head and used my knee and split his head open and threw him against a tree. And his patrol cap, his PC, had fallen across his face. And then my ranger buddy started chewing me out, but he wasn't looking at me. He was like yelling at me, but he wasn't looking at me. I looked behind me. There's that RI looking at me, you know, with the hands on his hips. I was like, oh, crap. So I went and picked that guy's PC off, and it had split his forehead completely open, right? And the blood jumped up on, you know, flew up onto my chest, just squirted on my chest. And I was like, oh, let's get the medevac, and I sent this guy in and everything. And I didn't get arrested, but I got pulled out of the class. So that was the end of my my chance to be a ranger. I was too mean to be a ranger. I got sent back to the regiment, and Colonel Downing told me to get out of his regiment. And
so close.
So close. Yeah. Well, I got kicked out the same day that my mentor, Sergeant Mellinger, who really turned out to be, you know, the guy that was real mean to me at the beginning. He taught me all kinds of stuff, but he was getting kicked out too because he wouldn't pay $20 for a black PT uniform. He's like, hey, if the Rangers wanted us to have a non-standard PT uniform, the unit pays for it.
Right.
You know, so both of us got kicked out of the Ranger Regiment.
Man at all.
Yeah, we got kicked out of the Ranger Regiment. So, and then I went to the replacement company, and then a couple weeks later, they sent me back to the Ranger Department, where I just got kicked out of, and that was it for me. I was like, okay, whatever. And then Tex Turner, the guy who kicked me on Ranger School, said, you know, after being there for a few weeks and everything, and it was a real good job. It wasn't a hard job at all, but he told me he wanted me to be a Ranger instructor. He wanted me to get my tab and be a Ranger instructor. And I said, well, you want me to go back to Florida phase and redo Florida phase? He goes, no, I want you to start over at day one. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go to college. I'm on my way to college.
Right,
you know?
right.
So that was 1980. That was the summer of 1985, and that was the end of my tour.